All right. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Pacific War Channel, where we cover the entire history of the Asia-Pacific War from 1937 all the way up to 1945 and all the major events that led up to it. Joined here by fellow YouTuber Scott. How's it going?
Good, very good. Thank you very much for having me on tonight. I totally appreciate it. It's a great honor.
It's not a problem. And of course, this episode is timely as we're coming up to Pearl Harbor. I thought, who better to go to than yourself? Actually, why don't we start off by you just telling us a little bit about your YouTube channel and your background?
Well, my name is Scott Freund. My YouTube channel is SFR Productions, and I'm kind of an amateur historian, documentary filmmaker, and I got my start doing documentaries about Pearl Harbor. My first was Pearl Harbor: The Real Story, and it turned out quite well. It actually was sold by the National Park Service bookstore there at the Arizona Memorial starting in 2000, and it's been sold there up until probably about 2020, and when they kind of went away from DVD sales. With that study of Pearl Harbor, I've extended into other areas of the Pacific and into Europe. So being an amateur historian, I just love to travel and then document what I see and the history about what was there. So that's kind of what I do as my hobby, is sharing my love of history with people.
Awesome. And stating all of that, there is a lot to know about Pearl Harbor, and there's especially a lot that goes unsaid. And that was, I kind of think, the inspiration for the subsections that we chose for this episode. I wanted to find things that people don't know so much about, the lesser known facts about Pearl Harbor. And this is going to be broken down into 5 videos, and then there will be a full podcast, most likely on Podbean, and perhaps on the YouTube channel, and perhaps also on the Kings and Generals channel. But stating that to the audience, I'll just let you know the 5 sections that we're going to cover today. The first one is the story of Takeo Yoshikawa. The second one will be the midget submarine attacks in Pearl Harbor. The third one will be the military facilities that were hit prior to the ships, and afterwards with the second wave, of course. The fourth one, the extent of the damage to the ships, the significance of what really happened at Pearl Harbor, and what wasn't hit, for that matter. The fifth one, the Arizona footage story that's going to be brought by Scott. And the last one is kind of a silly add-on. The sixth one is going to be a silly conspiracy theory, one in particular that's known as the backdoor theory, which anyone who is a Pearl Harbor enthusiast has definitely heard about this one and all the various aspects of it. So, stating all of that, I might be taking Scott a bit hostage here with this one story, and out of all the things we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to admit to the audience, this is going to be a little bit more of a scripted one because I wanted to kind of give a full story as to what was going on with this. But this is a story of the main spy who was at Hawaii and helped with the entire operation for Pearl Harbor. And he wasn't very well known for a very long time, and he never got official recognition in the end, and had kind of a very sad fate. And I'll tell his story, and please pitch in if you have any questions or anything, because this is going to be just kind of a rendition of I hope, a 10-minute and less story of this guy. You can think of him as kind of a James Bond figure because he kind of was. So Takeo Yoshikawa was born in Shikoku, Japan. He was the son of a cop, and he graduated from the Japanese Naval Academy at Etajima in 1933, top of his class. He served in the Imperial Japanese Navy, briefly aboard one cruiser, the Asama, and a submarine before he began training as a naval pilot, and this was in the early 30s. It turns out he has some kind of medical condition, and when he went up flying, his intestines hurt so severely he couldn't fly. So due to this medical reason, he had to stop pursuing this, and he was discharged from the IJN in 1936. And apparently he, in his own testimony, he almost sought to kill himself as a result, because this really was his passion in life. But in 1937, he got right back into it, this time joining the IJN as an intelligence officer for the 3rd Division, and he specialized in the United States and the UK. Now, by the process of all of his work, which was extensive. He was a very hardworking person. You can actually read his testimony online. That's in the U.S. database for the Navy. By 1940, he passed the Foreign Ministry English examination, and he became the leading expert on the United States Navy. He literally told people he could pick out every single silhouette of every ship. And I do have a quote from him on this part of his life. And it goes as such. In any event, by 1940, I was the Naval General Staff's acknowledged American expert. I knew by then every United States man of war and aircraft type by name, hull number, configuration, and technical characteristics. And I knew, too, a great deal of general information about the United States naval bases at Manila, Guam, and Pearl Harbor. My previous detailed studies of the Mahan's theories of sea power and more recent publications on American naval tactics and strategy served to pull together in usable form my broad knowledge of the United States Navy. And so it was that, on a gray, cold winter day at the end of 1939, my chief called me into his office and he said, "Yoshikawa, you are ready now." And unbeknownst to Yoshikawa, he was being sent on a much more important mission that he could ever know. He received a post in Hawaii as the vice consul under the fake name Tadashi Monimura, and he arrived in Hawaii in March of 1941 alongside Nagano Kita, the new consul general for Japan, who was one of the only men who knew about his mission for a brief amount of time, although Yoshikawa will deal with other people. He was sent as a spy, as you can imagine, and the consul position was simply a cover story. He got an apartment overlooking Pearl Harbor and he began wandering about the island of Oahu, observing and taking notes of the fleet movements and their security measures. He even rented a small aircraft at John Rogers Airport to fly over Oahu to get a better look at the docks and facilities. And that is an interesting story I can't go into, but the fact that he was able to do that is pretty surprising. And he took this a step further. He actually dove under the harbor using a breathing device, which I actually don't know what it would have been like back then. And he performed a real James Bond operation there, looking underneath the harbor. And he also worked alongside the Abwehr, the Germans' military intelligence branch. They had an agent in Hawaii named Bernard Kuhn, and another Japanese agent named Kokichi Seki, but he was a junior, actually learning from Yoshikawa, so he wasn't a quote-unquote real spy then. And there's a whole other story behind the German involvement in this, which we might get into later in another section. Now, although Hawaii had arguably the largest population of Japanese Americans, in Yoshikawa's testimony, he tried to avoid them as a potential resource because he believed that they were not trustworthy, because he thought that their loyalty was to the United States, of which he would have been quite right. The majority were. Yoshikawa would often leave the consulate building dressing casually, so kind of like a tourist. You could actually picture him in a Hawaiian shirt and glasses, like that, the way I would envision it. I have seen a photo that looked like that. And he acquired two personal drivers who drove him around Oahu in personal vehicles rather than the consulate vehicles to avoid attention. So he wasn't an idiot. He was actually pretty good at his job, and it'll go without saying he does pull it off. He even taught one of the drivers all the silhouettes and how to identify them so that this man could help him watch some of the ships, so do some of the work for him. The man's name was Richard Kotsushidoro, and so he helped with surveillance. One spot Yoshikawa loved to visit the most was Ito's Soda Stand, right beside Pearl City Landing. It was a popular place where ship personnel would come and go when they were on assignments. He would dress like a laborer to try and blend in with other workers, and he would listen in on conversations to acquire more intel. It always makes me think of the 1940s when they had those films telling the troops, don't talk in bars, quiet down, the enemy's always listening. It's Yoshikawa. So, he observed all sorts of places like the East Lock where the aircraft carriers were, and he would often count how many vegetable trucks would go by to predict the departure times for certain ships. It's very interesting to learn how the spy trade worked. Another place he was famous to go to was the Chonchoro Japanese Tea House on the Ueno Heights, which had a second floor telescope overlooking the harbor. And he befriended a waitress there, and he used her as espionage cover, bringing her around like she was his date, and they pretended to be sightseeing. He took this a step further, and he actually began going around with a geisha, which would have been interesting to see. And a major piece of intelligence that he found was he calculated the air turbulence along currents coming into the harbor. This would have been very useful for the pilots when they were performing their torpedo runs, for example. The intelligence Yoshikawa attained was sent to Tokyo using the Purple Code, very famous, by the Japanese Foreign Ministry, which the United States did crack, but his messages were never truly discovered because the consulate in Hawaii was considered a low priority, as most messages that were coming in and out were for commercial in nature. And to be honest, there was so many messages going in and out, and so few people working for the United States cryptanalysts that they couldn't get all these messages in the first place. So they had to prioritize. One message sent to Yoshikawa did grab the attention of the United States, though, on September the 24th, 1941. The message divided Pearl Harbor into 5 distinct zones and requested the location and number of warships indicated on a grid plot of the harbor. That would have been very suspicious, but because of short staff and other intelligence priorities, the message was dismissed. Yoshikawa reported the double row mooring pattern for the US battleships, a lack of aerial patrols in Oahu's northern section, which would prove to be very critical pieces of information. On the 5th of December, he received a direct message asking whether the United States ships were protected by anti-aircraft weapons or anti-submarine nets, and his response could have easily tipped off the Americans, but his messages again were not discovered nor decrypted until a day after the attack. And I have a quote from Yoshikawa. It was from his last report. Oh, it was his last report on December the 6th. December the 6th, local time. Vessels moored in harbor: 9 battleships, 3 Class B cruisers, 3 seaplane tenders, 17 destroyers. Entering the harbor are 4 Class B cruisers, 3 destroyers. All aircraft carriers and heavy cruisers have departed the harbor. No indication of any changes in the U.S. fleet or anything unusual. He also, in his memoirs, recounted this after he had sent the message. So it was that, the last brief message I was working on alone in my silent office on that far-off night of December the 6th, 1941, became the final intelligence report in which the Japanese task force commander based the attack on Pearl Harbor. I am a common man, and my triumph in life has been small, but for a moment at least, I held history in the palm of my hand. Quite theatrical, that passage. Yoshikawa surprisingly had no knowledge of the planned attack on Pearl Harbor, but being in the Navy and being a spy in Pearl Harbor, he did assume that there was going to be some kind of attack. He treated his mission extremely critically. He was very serious about it. On the morning of December the 7th, Yoshikawa was having breakfast around almost 8 o'clock in the morning when the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. He switched on the shortwave radio and he listened to the 8 o'clock news on Radio Tokyo, where he heard the phrase "east wind rain," which was said twice by the announcer. And Yoshikawa explains this in his memoirs. East wind rain, the announcer had carefully enunciated during the weather forecast. This meant the Imperial Council in Tokyo had decided for war with the United States. If they had said north wind cloudy, it would have meant war with the Soviet Union. West wind clear would have meant war with Great Britain. Kita and I stood up immediately, walked to the Consul General's office, and we began burning our code books and secret diplomatic information intelligence instructions. The FBI would find him at 8:30 a.m., so he had a brief window to do all that, in the consulate building, and there was no incriminating evidence of his espionage. Although actually they did find one sketch in the garbage that he made of the harbor, but they deemed this not enough to actually go after him. He was kept under watch at San Diego between December and March till 1942, and then he was moved to a camp in Arizona until August, when he was returned to Japan under a diplomatic prisoner exchange. He worked as a naval intelligence officer for the entire war, and when the United States began the occupation of Japan after they had won the war, he went into hiding as a Buddhist monk, fearing that he was going to be prosecuted for his role in Pearl Harbor, which he won't be. It's very surprising. He never received official recognition for his services during the war, and afterwards he operated a failed candy business, which failed largely because everybody in his local community found out he was the spy responsible for Pearl Harbor, and they blamed him for the atomic bombs. So he ended up unemployed, he had no money, and his wife supported him for the rest of his life. He actually had quite a miserable end to his story. but he was the spy that kind of arguably allowed for Pearl Harbor to go down the way it did.
Very interesting story with him. Yes.
I don't think many people know about him, nor the German intelligence officer who was on Hawaii, who made a few mistakes, mind you, and
Yes.
threatened to screw everything up, actually.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it is the whole story is very incredible, and most people don't know anything about it. And they in a lot of blame goes to, well, the Japanese there on the island, but the Japanese were very pro-American on the island, and
Yeah.
that says a lot about the Japanese on Oahu.
I find it interesting because I read his entire memoir in on the United States naval site, and he goes kind of out of a limb to state that I didn't trust the Japanese people on the island because I really believed that they were loyal to the United States. It's almost like he really wanted to press on that issue because, well, as we all know, with the internment camps in the United States and Canada,
Yep.
yeah, it was awful.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
But stating that, I guess we'll call that section one, the story of this spy. Yeah. Uh, maybe perhaps just for the audience members to hear one more time, if you could just shout out your YouTube channel just to let them know what they could find there, why they should go see your stuff.
Well, it's SFR Productions, and you can find it. It's the top of the page. There are a couple SFR Productions apparently on YouTube, but mine you'll see the Pearl Harbor Memorial, the Arizona Memorial on the top. A new thing that I'm actually doing is, like I said, I travel a lot. I've started a new series on my page called History Adventures, and the concept with History Adventures is people always have their phones and they're looking at their phones. And while you're sitting waiting for the doctor or something, what do? You scroll on your phone. So, History Adventures, I'm taking people on trips around the world to different military bases, different military battlefields. And I make them into little 10-minute or less little snippets, a little bit of history, and then what you see today. So, the newest thing that we're doing on our page is History Adventures, where we take you around. But you also, when you go to my page, my YouTube page, you're going to find lots of Pearl Harbor stuff. You're going to find a lot of stuff on Tarawa. I'm very excited about Tarawa because next year, for November 2023, that is the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Tarawa in November, and I will be going there for 3 days to film, to tour around, and do a bunch of stuff. So you'll find a bunch of films on Tarawa. You're going to find some Civil War stuff that I put together. That's from productions that I did long ago. Um, Also, if you go to my Facebook SFR page on my Facebook page, you're going to find tons of photo albums where I just share thousands of photographs. I have an album on Iwo Jima that's 800 plus photos. I have Tarawa photos. There's probably 500 photos there. I have Peleliu photos, Guadalcanal photos, Pearl Harbor, you name it. So, and I love sharing history with people. So, again, my YouTube page is SFR Productions, and my Facebook page is SFR Productions also, where you can go and get photos. So, I enjoy doing that. I enjoy history. It's a passion of mine.
All right, so please check out his channel. And thank you again for coming here, and thank you again for sharing the story and this photographic stuff that you found. It's such an incredible story that I just love that even to this day we still find things in history that have been not uncovered yet. That's what makes it so exciting.
And thank you for having me. It was a great honor being on the show tonight. Thank you.
This has been the Pacific War Channel, over and out.